Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. Envision yourself with the freedom to pick and choose where you want to go, what you want to do today, how you choose to do it, without having to worry about whatever responsibilities you may have behind the scenes. Now, I just have one question. How did you envision yourself? Most would answer this question with, as a kid, of course. However, I think that answering that you saw yourself as either child or adult could lead to the same overall result in the end. Some crave the joy of freedom and the satisfaction of adventure, but they don't necessarily want to enjoy that feeling while as a kid again. While some, based on how they've lived their life up to this point, can't envision a life like I described any other way than as a child due to their more often than not easier lifestyle than adults. The Legend of Zelda for the NES was released back in 1986, and I assure you, Nintendo had no idea the impact this first game was going to cause over 30 years later. Numerous titles in this franchise came to build the foundation of what people would come to expect from action-adventure games, even going as far as inventing whole mechanics never before seen in the gaming industry at all. However, for those big ones, we'll get to those in due time throughout this series of retrospectives. The Legend of Zelda is a curious case. More often than not, there's only a few perspectives I see online nowadays, and it's that either people hate this game because it's aged like milk, or love and respect it because of how Nintendo envisioned people experiencing this game and what it let the series become. And I'll be honest, before this video, I'd only played through this game twice in the past, and most of my memory of this game is actually just opinions from other people on YouTube. So for this retrospective, I thought it was best to replay the game myself. I wasn't exactly going for 100% this time around, and I'll show you why later, so keep this in mind. But with that being said, I'm not the first or last to do this kind of thing. But all the same, I hope you enjoy another Legend of Zelda retrospective. According to Shigeru Miyamoto, the father of the Zelda series, this franchise was originally inspired by his expeditions while living in the countryside of Japan. He grew enamored by the sheer freedom he felt by not knowing where to go and trying to make his way to his destination. And you can see this clear as day within the first Legend of Zelda. At the very beginning of the game, you're just dropped into the thick of it. You're given a short message to collect all 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, take down Ganon, and save Princess Zelda. But how you do that is completely up to you. You could even attempt to go save Zelda from the final dungeon immediately if you wanted, however, you wouldn't get that far. But there's only a few places on this map where you can't actually access due to not having specific tools in your arsenal just yet. However, outside of that, this world really is your oyster. There's tons of places to see, so many things to collect. In a way, this game is a giant playground to get lost and be enveloped by. But if this place was to really be a sandbox, I'm not joking here, this is not one you'd actually be able to relax in at first. The overworld is infested with monsters, within the forests, under the sand, beneath the waves, and so much more. What's criminal is that it's hard to enjoy the scenery and world design from a purely aesthetic perspective because on dang near every screen in this game, there are hordes of enemies you'll have to have finesse to even avoid. There's no type of level up system in this game, mind you, so you're not badly hurt by avoiding enemies. However, money is an important aspect of this game, especially if you plan on surviving long enough to complete your mission. And I mean that this game kind of starves you for rupees, the currency of the Zelda franchise. The drop rate for rupees is widely inconsistent, and with the most important items costing at least 60 to 70 rupees, you'll be finding yourself running out constantly if you don't adapt to the game quick enough, because you'll be buying potions at every available opportunity. You may see that from this footage, I seem to carry a lot of rupees, and during the 5 hours or so it took me to recomplete this game, the reason I was able to stay afloat like this was because I knew about the secrets within this game. As I played, I remembered a lot of the locations of the secret caves that held free rupees, 10, 30, even 100. But that right there is the major problem Zelda 1 has. I was only able to get these bad boys because I knew they were there. Now, there is a reason Nintendo did this. The game was originally developed with the current time in mind, where the player would consult the manual that would point them in the right direction, explain what items did, and etc. But this was over 35 years ago. Most don't have those old manuals now, and Nintendo hasn't done the best job preserving that info when porting the game to newer consoles. So playing it without that manual makes this game 10 times more difficult than it already is. Now, I know you who are watching this video may know of Zelda Dungeon, a website dedicated to creating guides for 100% completion walkthroughs of every major Zelda game. So playing the game with this guide makes all the issues I brought up a non-issue. But debating on whether or not this problem being apparent despite solutions existing isn't necessarily my goal here, as this was not my first time playing the game. I didn't struggle with not knowing where to go for most of my adventure. However, my first playthrough, I do remember using the guide and feeling as though the game would be impossible to play in a timely manner without it. However, I can also agree that if it's your first time playing through this game, you should at least see how far you can get without it. I think that what Miyamoto envisioned for this game is a beautiful thing, but I can agree that this format will be done much better later on. Keep that in mind for another retrospective. Now, I've taken a lot of time to focus on the overworld of this game earlier on, which is rare for me because my general philosophy for video games that let you loose in a world to explore is that what's important isn't the world itself, it's how the player is capable of interacting with it. And for a game on the NES, I think a decent job was done showcasing a big world that Link is able to make himself a part of. At the beginning of the adventure, Link can simply do nothing. No run, no jump, no attack, just simply go for a stroll through the woods. However, as your adventure continues, you'll find items that let you interact with the world in new ways. You'll be able to cut through your foes that attack you, use your candle or later on your magic rod to burn bushes leading to secret passageways, call upon the winds of Hyrule with your whistle to whisk you away to nearby dungeons, lift heavy rocks that lead to hidden shortcuts, and more. This game does a great job at letting players look back in retrospect at how far they've come, from hardly being able to get past a couple of screens without being on the verge of death, all the way to being an unflinching sentinel that takes little to no damage at all from some enemies. As you progress, you start feeling like Hyrule is becoming more and more the playground that Miyamoto originally envisioned it to be. And this is very important because those first few hours, I understand, can be very rough. Getting used to Link simply thrusting his sword forward instead of slashing it like later games, having to get used to angling and timing blocking attacks just right, and overall having no idea where anything on this dangerous map is, the game feels like it's forcing you to explore if you want to progress, but it also feels just so intimidating because it's so harsh to you when you don't even have much yet. But if you stick with it, you'll see that this place isn't so scary, and that you'll be able to focus more on the secrets hidden away here than the obstacles trying to prevent you from seeing them. But there is something I haven't brought up yet, and to some it may contradict my previous statement, but it's no secret that throughout the Zelda series there's one staple that's been consistent in every game, and that's dungeons, or palaces, or temples. They all serve as what many fans think of as a primary draw to these games. Now, the number of them may vary from game to game. I still think the amount is taken into consideration when designing the overall scope of the game. Breath of the Wild having 9 divine beasts would have been a little overkill, don't you think? And this tradition started with Zelda 1. In this game, there are 9 dungeons, with the 9th being where you'll take out Ganon and save Princess Zelda at long last. This is one of the few games in the series that was designed in a manner where you can tackle dungeons in different orders. As I said before, this is something that Nintendo started shying away from until most recently. I love this style of game because it allows for greater replayability. The items you get from a certain dungeon may allow you to do things you wouldn't normally be able to do at certain points of the game, which allows for sequence breaking. Now, I'm not too into the speedrun scene for this game. I don't hate myself that much to do that just yet, but despite minimal preventions, you can play a lot of the game how you want to. However, despite that, I still don't think doing this is the best course of action to take with this specific game. That's because this game doesn't scale the enemies for the dungeon you go to. If you go to the 8th dungeon early on, you're gonna get ripped in half, stepped on, and get an extremely angry email in your inbox. Now, not all dungeons are like this, mind you, but around the point of the 5th palace, I had been starting and finishing each dungeon in less than 10 minutes, as there's no substantial puzzles to solve within, and most of the bosses go down in just a couple of hits. Though again, around the 5th dungeon, things started to turn up. New enemy encounters were rampant, but what really started irking me was the dungeon design itself. There are so many enemies, it's freaking ridiculous. I had to pause the game so many times just to compose myself, and the main reason for this was because of an ability Link has that I hadn't mentioned earlier. When Link is at full health, he can shoot a sword beam from the tip of his blade at enemies, which makes it a great addition to Link's arsenal, especially if you've explored the world and found what you needed in order to collect the magical sword, which does 4 times the damage as your starting sword. But that's just it. you can only use this ability at full health. And I'm gonna be real with you, homie, that's not gonna be often. The dungeon design is so cluttered in so many of these rooms that there's hardly a place to stand when you get into them. Sometimes you get hit as soon as you load into the room, and when you lose the ability to shoot the sword beam, it means you gotta get up close and personal to even hurt these guys, especially later on when so many enemies aren't hurt by the magical rod or boomerang, and you can only hurt them from certain perspectives, and they have shields that must be hit a certain number of times before the main body can even be damaged. It got to the point where I said screw it and started to use the rewind feature since I was playing through the Nintendo Switch Online service. Now hey, don't judge me too harshly. Even though I did use the rewind feature, I would still be in the exact same situation afterwards, so I still had to make a decision on where to move, have the skills to dodge enemy attacks, and the courage to get in there and get the job done. So if you think I played your childhood game wrong, then sue me. But despite everything I said, it's been 35 years since Zelda 1 hit stores for the world to experience. Love it or hate it, no one can deny the impact this game had on not only its genre, but to video games as a whole. More and more developers grew bold enough to try to put the creativity in the players' hand and let them define their own adventures. This has had such a lasting impact that even now, decades later, we still see it day to day in the gaming industry. I really love this game. I'm not a fan of a ton of things that it does, and I feel though the game points you to the manual for things, I feel it's more on Nintendo for not including it to be easily accessible when playing the game on modern consoles, like adding it to the Switch Online suspend menu where you can access the original map of the game. That'd be sick. But time and time again, The Legend of Zelda would go on to break new boundaries, reach greater heights, destroy expectations, and truly be a part of that legend. Though the full philosophy of the original Zelda wasn't used for each game to come, the game was still used as a blueprint to learn from, so that this legend can become better and better every time it's told.